Hello dolls, and welcome back to another video. Today I would like to talk about one of the most intriguing love stories of the 1960s. It is a love story so marked by tragedy, and it almost seems like it was cursed in a sense. However, these two lovers just truly couldn't live without, and their bond truly was one of a kind. Today, I would like to tell you about the cursed love of Jim Morrison and Pamela Courson. I've always been so fascinated by Pamela Courson, and we all know that the Oliver Stone Doors biopic doesn't really has a lot of truth to it, so I've always been very fascinated to find out more about this love story. And that is when I came across a book called Angels Dance and Angels Die, the tragic romance of Pamela and Jim Morrison. It was written by Patricia Butler and released in 2001, and I was able to read a copy of it online, and I absolutely adored it. It was such an insightful book, and I really wanted to tell this story because I feel like Jim Morrison's life is so highly publicized, but there are so many more stories tied to Pamela because these two spent pretty much the majority of their adult life together. So yeah, I would like to take you back to Los Angeles in the 1960s to unravel the cursed love of Pamela Courson and Jim Morrison. There's a love story buried deep in the haze of 1960s Los Angeles, wild, complicated, and tinged with tragedy. Jim Morrison, the restless poet with a voice like fire and shadow, and Pamela Courson, the fierce wildflower who matched his intensity with her own brand of untamed spirit. Their love wasn't simple or easy. It was messy, unconventional, a constant dance between devotion and chaos, muse and madness, passion and pain. They lived fast, loved fiercely, and fueled each other's art in a way few ever have. Pamela was more than just Jim's girlfriend. She was his cosmic partner, his anchor, and his wild card. Together they carved out a world of their own amid the bright lights and dark nights of the Sunset Strip. But behind the glamour was a storm, drug addiction, jealousies, and betrayals that threatened to tear them apart. Yet somehow they always came back to each other. But the fire that fueled them couldn't burn forever. He died in a Paris bathtub at 27. She followed less than 3 years later, same age, same fate. Some say it was heroin, others believe something stranger. What remains is the mystery and the mythology. Two star-crossed lovers wrapped in leather, lace, and legend. Forever young, forever lost, forever each other's. Chapter 1. Collision on the Sunset Strip. Los Angeles in 1965. The city's night air hummed with psychedelic rock, and a new band called The Doors was quietly building a buzz while playing the Sunset Strip clubs. One night, as they were playing at the dimly lit London fog, art student Pamela Courson wandered into the crowd to watch the band. Also in the club was Jim Morrison, half living on Venice Beach, delivering sunshine daydream songs that throbbed with passion and menace. Pamela would later say that they were instantly drawn to each other, and in that instant magic of their first meeting, they found something rare in one another. From the beginning, their connection was electric and unconventional. Jim called her his cosmic partner, a companion who didn't just share his world, she completed it. Ray Manzarek, the band's keyboardist, and one of Jim's closest friends put it best, quote, "I never knew another person who could so complement Jim's bizarreness." Their bond transcended the cliches of romance. Pam wasn't merely a muse, she was an equal in chaos and creativity, an active participant in Jim's artistic journey. In a city of excess, they discovered a kindred soul, two wild spirits igniting the flames of a fierce, if tumultuous, love. Chapter 2. A Poet Born on the Beach. Before I continue going forward with their love story, I would like to take a step back and tell you a little bit about Jim and Pam personally. Jim Morrison was born on December 8th of 1943 in Melbourne, Florida, and he was the son of a distinguished U.S. Navy officer. He grew up being shuttled from base to base by his father, Admiral George S. Morrison, who kept climbing the ranks. This was a childhood of constant motion that bred a restless spirit. Young Jimmy, as everyone called him, devoured literature and mysticism long before he sang on stage. As a child, he even spun a family legend about a near-fatal car accident involving Native Americans, claiming a soul had entered his body and left him, quote, with centuries of wisdom and power. This legend became a foundational myth that shaped his entire public persona. According to several biographies and even his own poetic retellings, the incident occurred in October of 1947, when Jim was just 4 years old on a family road trip through the American Southwest. He later described it vividly in performances and lyrics. In his spoken piece, Dawn's Highway, he says, quote, Indians scattered on dawn's highway bleeding. Ghosts crowd the young child's fragile eggshell mind. The souls of the ghosts of those dead Indians, maybe 1 or 2 of them, were just running around, freaking out, and just leaped into my soul. And they are still in there. I had heard about this incident, but the first time that I read a more personal account was in Nico's biography. It is called You Are Beautiful and You Are Alone. It's one of my all-time favorite biographies. It is absolutely fantastic. And she recalls how he told her this story and how he always said that it was real and that he really believed that this has happened. Now, his family said that they never were in that car crash, so this might have been a dream or something. But this story built a lot of the Jim Morrison persona that he took on later. But at home, young Jim could be unruly. By 6th grade, he was expelled from Cub Scouts for disruptive behavior, a small prelude to the iconoclastic shock that would mark his career. These early years of uproar and intuition skimmed in the shadow of warship, and Southern Sun laid the foundation for the Lizard King's poetic rebellion. Chapter 2. The Wildflower of Orange County. Pamela Courson arrived in California with an almost equally dramatic destiny. She was also born in December 22nd of 1946, in Weed, a quiet town in Northern California, where she was raised in suburban comfort. As mentioned, Jim had a thing for myths and legends, which is why when he heard where Pamela was from, he believed it was fate that brought the two of them together. Pamela was born, as said, in Weed, California, which is near Mount Shasta. This place is famous as the rumored home of the occult lizard legends. Those who believe it say that there's a huge underground city in the shape of a lizard. His head and heart are under LA, and his tail ends near Mount Shasta, buried underneath the town of Weed. Jim wasn't just drawn to her. He believed their meeting was fate, wired into some cosmic map, stretching from Weed's mystique right into his Sunset Strip sound. Pamela's mother, Pearl Courson, who everyone called Penny, was an interior designer, and her father, Columbus, who was called Corky by everyone, was a former Navy bombardier turned junior high principal. Though kind and caring, they couldn't offer her what she craved: wilderness, mystery, and art. Pam wanted more than white picket fences. Both Jim and Pam were lonely birds, odd ones who never quite fit, but they leaned into it. Pamela refused to wear school uniforms, and she was a loner, often spending her time on the playground by herself. Others found her strange and didn't want to play with her. She was there, but always a little removed. In high school, she dyed her hair bright black and showed up dressed in all black, way ahead of the goth curve. Pamela also most likely struggled with anorexia for most of her life. She was tiny and rarely ate. Classmates said that she looked like she was trying to make herself disappear. But she was also brilliant. She united intelligence with pure rebellion. She flunked classes, cut school, skipped out at home. Her parents barely intervened. By graduation, she was already hitchhiking to clubs in Newport Beach to chase live music. By her late teens, Pamela was studying art at Los Angeles City College, but academia felt constraining. She dropped out and began to wander, determined to pursue art on her own terms. Friends remembered her as beautiful and willful, a snow queen, as they said, outwardly graceful yet dangerously unpredictable. As one friend later put it, quote, "She was beautiful, she looked like the snow queen, and she loved travel because when you were traveling, life happened to you." By the time she met Jim Morrison in 1965, she had already embraced the hippie movement with its swirling ideas of freedom, rebellion, and self-expression. And she wasn't looking for someone ordinary. Jim, then a little-known poet turned singer performing at the dim London fog, matched her intensity. The two were instantly drawn to each other. Chapter 4. Cosmic Lovers and Themis. Formed in 1965 by Jim Morrison and Ray Manzarek, the Doors emerged from the smoky underground of Venice Beach into one of the most electrifying acts of the decade. With Robbie Krieger's serpentine guitar and John Densmore's jazz-inflected drumming, the band fused blues, psychedelia, and poetry into something raw and cinematic. By 1967, their self-titled debut had unleashed Light My Fire onto the airwaves, a swirling 6-minute odyssey that catapulted them to stardom almost overnight. As their fame ignited, so did the myth of Jim Morrison and Pamela Courson. There are many different stories about when, where, and how Pamela and Jim met, with many suggesting that they probably ran into each other at some party, they were kind of like studying in the same city during the same time, and that they just ran into each other at some point. However, the real spark was ignited at a little venue called the London Fog. Ray Manzarek remembered that it actually was John Densmore who first spotted Pamela. But within a week, it was Jim and Pamela. They were locked in some kind of electric stare-down. A little later, by 1967, the Doors had skyrocketed. Light My Fire had gone #1, and Los Angeles hung on Jim Morrison's every move. Pamela Courson had transformed from muse to co-conspirator. That summer, they shared a house in Laurel Canyon, the epicenter of LA's creative counterculture, living as much in soul as in proximity. They bought their house on Love Street in Laurel Canyon and became part of the creative crowd living there. Laurel Canyon was the center of new music in the late 1960s. Frank Zappa, Mama Cass, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Joni Mitchell all resided on the canyon. If you want to know more about the Laurel Canyon crowd, the time, the place, and all of its history, make sure to check out this video because I already made a video all about the wonderful, magical place that was Laurel Canyon in the late 1960s. And another person also living on the canyon was Miss P, who hung around Frank Zappa's house with her band, the GTOs. In her biography, she recalls meeting Jim. One night, as the story goes, she heard music across the street and wandered over, drawn by the echo of Jim's voice. She rang the bell, curiosity alight. Rumor says she wanted to see what happens in the magnetism of that house. But Pamela didn't hesitate. Full of fire and fierce affiliation, and promptly sent Miss P away. No drama, no spectacle, just protective, Bonnie and Clyde energy, guarding the sanctity of their world. This encounter, which over the years has become an urban legend, captured everything about their dynamic. Boundary pushing, protective, and electric. It wasn't about jealousy as much as the assertion that their life, wild, creative, and frayed, was theirs alone. I'm gonna talk more about this later, but Jim had many affairs, and Pamela did too, but there was always this common ground of, you and I, we are soulmates, and we belong together, and what you do and who you hang out with and who you sleep with, that is fine, but emotionally, spiritually, you and I are bond. I think it isn't a secret that Jim Morrison loved women. He loved to flirt, date, and hang around the most beautiful girls, and they followed his every step. However, he truly loved Pamela. He loved her deeper than anyone else could. Even though he had affairs, he always knew his heart belonged to Pamela. In 1968, Ray Manzarek married his wife, Dorothy, and Jim and Pam were proudly standing with them as their best man and bridesmaid. A week later, on June 26, Pamela secured them their own marriage license. They never went through with it. They never ended up getting married, but the gesture alone marked just how intertwined their lives had become. They didn't care about the bureaucracy. They didn't care about the papers. They felt like they were already married by spirit and soul. During this time, Jim had also opened his wallet for her, not just out of indulgence, but out of deep respect for her vision and spirit. He became the silent investor behind Themis, a boutique that Pamela launched along the Sunset Strip. It was named after the Greek goddess of law and destiny. but Themis quickly transcended retail. Pamela referred to it as, quote, less a store and more a romantic poetry den, a space where candles flickered besides tapestries and incense curled through the air. It was a living, breathing salon, more Parisian midday than American boutique. The Themis boutique must have been such a beautiful place. There are only very few pictures and there's not a lot of information about it. However, I'm gonna put up everything that I find, and one detail that I loved about it was that they had this vision to basically have the whole ceiling covered in cracked and old mirrors. And so they put out an insert and they basically were like, whoever has and wants to sell old or broken mirrors, we are interested. And they ended up covering the entire ceiling, which I adore. I really see her vision for this, and I feel like this is kind of like the Apple boutique thing. This definitely is something that I come by every now and then when making these videos and researching for them. How people in the 60s started shops and stores more because they wanted a cool place to hang out, in a sense. And all of these people weren't businessmen or women. And that is why all of these places flopped. But it was okay if you just put it into perspective. Jim Morrison was incredibly rich already back then, and he was able to pay all their bills. It didn't matter. And it wasn't even like Themis just didn't make any money. It actively cost them money to keep it in business, but it also became a cool hangout spot, and that's why they just kept it. Pamela traveled the world looking for luxury pieces and unique designs, which, while they were beautiful, often didn't sell. It was pretty obvious. Themis didn't exist to make money. It was there to keep Pamela busy. It was her dream, and Jim made it possible for her. Jim himself would often pose at Themis' entrance, decked out in swirling kaftans, sometimes even wearing a peacock feather, captured as part performer, part gallery barker. It wasn't just for show. Themis drew Hollywood and jazz royalty. Sharon Tate, Miles Davis, and others were known to browse its global couture, weaving it further into the fabric of late 1960s LA. Their private and public selves collided beautifully. Pamela's fearless bohemian style seeped into Jim's stage persona, while his rising fame and income poured into their creative ventures. He wasn't just a rock star. He was her enabler, her patron, and her partner in a world they constructed together. By 1969, Jim poured his fortune into Themis. Money wasn't a worry. Jim lavished Pamela with clothes, cars, a Porsche, which she promptly ripped a door off when exiting at the airport. Jim's reaction? A kiss and a few bills. Quote, just get a new one, he told her. Themis flamed out after 2 years, expensive passion over profit. But to Jim, Pamela's happiness was payment enough. Chapter 5. Muse and Madness. The couple's creative bond ran extraordinarily deep. In Jim's eyes, she was indispensable. Quote, a lover, a friend, a woman I could not be without, as he said in an interview once. Sentiments that he also wove into haunting songs like Orange County Suite. Well, I used to know someone fair. She had orange ribbons in her hair. She was such a trip, she was hardly there. But I loved her just the same. There was rain in our window. The FM set was ragged. But she could talk, yeah, we learned to speak, and 1 year has gone by. Such a long road to seek it. All we did was break and freak it. We had all that lovers ever had. We just blew it. And I'm not sad, well I'm mad, and I'm bad, and 2 years have gone by. Now her world was bright orange, and the fire glowed, and her friend had a baby, and she lived with us. Yeah, we broke through the window, yeah, we knocked on the door. Her phone would not answer, yeah, but she's still home. Now her father has passed over, and her sister is a star, and her mother smokes diamonds, and she sleeps out in a car. Yeah, but she remembers Chicago, the musicians and guitars, and grass by the lake and people who laughed, and made her poor heart ache. Now we live down in the valley, we work out on the farm, we climb up to the mountains, and everything's fine. And I'm still here, and you're still there, and we're still around. But this by far wasn't the only song she inspired. She was his muse, and he dedicated his first volumes of poetry, titled The Lords and New Creatures, to her, even mentioning Pam by name. It is also widely believed that Queen of the Highway was written for her. She too fueled his creative fire, showing up at gigs, scribbling notes into studio sessions, and even bringing ideas from her travels into the lyrics and his life. Beneath the romantic veneer was a caustic, crackling restlessness. Their relationship ran on extremes, ecstatic one moment, explosive the next. They played twisted games, jumping out at each other with knives, daring one another through high-speed canyon drives that nearly flew off cliffs. Raymond Zarek put it best, quote, "They were opposite sides of the same coin, perfect for each other. That madness threaded through everything." One night, a fight ended with the cops showing up at their door. Pamela had called them to kick out Jim, only for the police to arrest her instead. Jim and Pam had quite the habit of driving around Los Angeles, parking their cars wherever they wanted, and sometimes even fully abandoning their cars because they wanted to buy a new one. And so there were a lot of parking tickets that these two accumulated over the years. But Jim would always take all of these tickets to the door's management, who would make sure that they were paid on time. However, when police showed up at their door, he still had all the parking tickets in his pocket because he had forgotten to hand them over to his management. And so when the police showed up, he handed all of these parking tickets over to them. Pamela was arrested and held at the station for hours until Jim had sobered up and came to bail her out with a smirk on his face. It was just another night in their stormy orbit. And even violence punctuated their love. But no matter how bad their fights got, their cycle always spun back to devotion, hushed apologies, trembling promises, declarations of forever. A bond made of fire and forgiveness, one not even death could truly break. Their chaos wasn't separate from their creativity. It fed it. You can hear Pam's ghost in LA Woman, her presence and absence echoing through the tracks. From the longing in Hyacinth House to fragments scattered across the lyrics, Pamela was both muse and mirror. They were cosmic lovers, fierce collaborators, and their madness, it was part of the art. Chapter 6. Other Loves and Betrayals. Jim and Pam's relationship was an open but complicated one. Both saw other people, weaving a tangled web of passion and pain. Jim had numerous affairs, from groupies like Pamela Des Barres and French actress Poppy, to famous figures such as Nico or Grace Slick. Biographies often depict him as being surrounded by a steady stream of women, even as Pamela stood loyally by his side, at least in the beginning. Photographers frequently caught Jim backstage entwined with other women. In one of his last interviews, Jim admitted that he had, quote, hurt Pam bad, but insisted, "She's my soul, and I love her." Jim's many affairs are often discussed, but one was different. Nico of the Velvet Underground spent a full weekend with him out in the desert, where they even got spiritually married. This is said to have broken Pamela's heart. She didn't mind him having affairs, but for her, their spiritual bond was sacred. This is very prominently featured in You Are Beautiful and You Are Alone, the Nico biography. And it is so interesting because they have this kind of like lost weekend, and Jim and Pam at this point, they're like breaking up, getting back together. But Nico really falls in love with Jim, and he, it seems like, loves her too, at least to some extent. At least he agrees to get married in like a spiritual sense, and they go through with it. And this really broke Pamela. As said, she didn't care about the cheating as much because she always knew that their souls belonged together, but this was like the thing that really broke her. And I do feel really bad for her, but then I also feel bad for Nico in this situation because she really fell for Jim. She dyed her hair red later on, which many believe is because she wanted to look more like Pamela, and she really wanted to be with him, yet Jim always went back to Pamela. Like, no matter who he was seeing, no matter whom he had an affair with, he would always, at the end of the day, go back to be with Pamela. Yet Pamela herself had lovers, including a French aristocrat, Jean de Breteuil. Jim hated heroin. He accused her of poisoning their lives with it, and one notorious fight turned violent over exactly this. Photographer Bobby Klein later recalled the story. One night, Pamela rushed to his house, claiming that Jim had tried to kill her. In her terrified recounting, he had pushed her into the closet and set it on fire. After learning she had been involved with the phony prince peddling heroin, This harrowing tale was even immortalized in Oliver Stone's The Doors film, which really isn't accurate in many ways, but this wild detail is rooted in the truth. But Pamela's heroin use was causing Jim's growing resentment. In Paris, he later reflected bitterly, quote, "I'm on the side of life, she's on the side of death." Their relationship was a tragic dance of betrayal and devotion. Each time they drifted apart, they found their way back to each other, only tightening the myth of their soulmate connection. During the Doors' 1968 European tour, Pamela stayed in London, where she left Jim for actor Christopher Jones. When she found a letter from his ex-wife, tempers flared. Jim flew to LA to win her back. They argued, they kissed, and then they flew home, perfectly destructive. Perfectly them. Despite all of this, they called each other soulmates. Friends agreed, describing them as a, quote, karmic link that was not going to be severed, except by death. Jim's love life was a revolving door. He sent love letters promising forever. Pam knew the truth and shared her own heartbreak in kind. She wasn't trying to win him back by conventional means. She wanted him to feel the pain she carried as deeply as he felt theirs. Chapter 7. A Dance with Demons. By 1969, Jim Morrison's legendary excess was in full swing. The Doors' LA success made alcohol and LSD constantly present at their Sunset Strip home. Jim's stage persona morphed into wild provocation. Most famously, the infamous Miami show in March of 1969, when he allegedly exposed himself on stage and screamed, "Let's get naked," to a stunned crowd. This show in Miami descended into pure drunken chaos, paint flying near riot energy. Rumors about Jim burying himself were false, but the fallout was very real. Blacklists, lawsuits, and a warrant for his arrest. On November 11th of 1969, he pleaded not guilty in court. That same day, mid-flight, he was rerouted for harassing a flight attendant, who later dropped the charges after Jim seduced her. Same men, same contradictions. Pamela wasn't at the trial. She was at the hospital, malnourished, stuck on IV fluids. The American circus had taken its toll on both of them. I want to add here that I do believe Jim, at least to some extent, fueled her eating disorder, and I don't want to say that he meant it in any harmful way, but he would always emphasize on how tiny she was. She was often less or around 100 pounds, which is not much for a grown woman. And I don't know, as someone who has struggled with an eating disorder, I just know that if people are very much complimenting your looks, even though you are at the point where technically it's not healthy anymore, then you feel like it is still healthy and you feel like you should keep it that way because apparently people like it. It makes people appreciate you. It just breaks my heart to think about that. Most likely for all of her life, she always struggled with her body. By the time Strange Days came out, Jim's drinking wasn't just a quirk. It was the elephant in every recording session. Some days he was brilliant, other days poison. The rest of the band held their breath, never knowing which Jim would show up. Photographer Paul Ferreira captured it perfectly, quote, "When Pam was there, it was like he was with his wife. But when she was gone, we'd get thrown out of places. He'd scream, pass out, pee his pants. Pam had him figured out. She stood up to him openly, in front of everyone. She wasn't a footnote. She was his grounding line." Raymond Zarek said it simply, quote, "Pamela was Jim's other half, the yin to his yang, someone who, quote, could so complement his bizarreness. She kept him riding through the dark dips, and he kept her dreaming." Chapter 8. Paris, a Bathtub Awakening. By spring of 1971, the Doors' momentum was fading. Overweight, bloated from alcohol, and emotionally exhausted, Jim Morrison's lifestyle had begun to take a visible toll. Hoping to escape the pressures of fame and find some kind of peace, Jim and Pamela left Los Angeles behind and sailed to Paris. For a brief, sun-drenched moment, they lived as artistic exiles, wandering through galleries, dancing in nightclubs, immersing themselves in the bohemian dream. Paris, Pamela believed, would offer Jim the creative refuge he so deeply needed. But instead of healing them, the city became the final chapter in their tragic love story. Their substance use worsened. The fighting intensified. Friends who visited during that time described the relationship on the edge. Two people deeply unhappy, but tethered by something neither could escape. And then, on July 3rd of 1971, it was over. According to Pamela's account, she awoke to find Jim unresponsive in the bathtub of their Rue Breteuil apartment. He had woken in the night, feeling sick, and drawn himself a bath. He assured her that he was okay, and so she went back to bed and fell asleep. When help arrived, it was already too late. Jim Morrison was dead. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but no autopsy was ever performed, and the rumors started almost immediately. Producer Paul Rothchild later claimed that Jim had mistakenly snorted heroin, thinking it was cocaine. Quote, "He faded real fast," he told photographer Bobby Klein. Quote, "Pam put him in the bathtub to try to revive him, but it was too late." Pamela was the only witness to Jim's final hours, and her inconsistent retellings only deepened the mystery of his death. She said he had been coughing up blood the night before. Others questioned whether Pamela's own heroin use may have played a role in his death, directly or indirectly. Some believe he died in a nightclub bathroom. Others believed he faked his death entirely. No charges were ever filed. No viewing was permitted. Jim Morrison was buried quietly at Père Lachaise beneath a plain white stone. His grave is now a legendary place. When I visited Paris a couple of years ago with my husband, we went there, and there was recent news actually, because there was a bust that was later put on his gravestone, and it vanished, I think sometime in the 80s, and police just found it at an unrelated rate a couple of weeks ago. So it might be put back up soon, and that would honestly be quite beautiful. Pamela returned to Los Angeles alone. Grief-stricken and shadowed, she refused to allow even close friends or family to see Jim's body before the burial. Her behavior grew erratic. She became increasingly withdrawn. Heroin became her crutch, and her spiral continued. I want to add here that I, like many others, believe that he might have also died from pneumonia. In this case, taking the bath would have been absolutely fatal. We'll never know it, and it could also be a Dennis Wilson situation. Dennis Wilson was diving to recover some things that he and his wife had thrown off their boat when they got into a fight, because they were living on a boat at that time. And he went into the Marina Bay to get their things, but because he was high and on drugs, he didn't know what his limits were, so he pushed his body further and ended up drowning. And I could see something like this, where maybe Jim Morrison went into the bathtub, fell asleep, and because there were drugs in his system, he couldn't react to drowning in the same way that Edie Sedgwick suffocated on her pillow, which is something that usually only happens to newborn babies, because usually your body is capable of realizing that you need oxygen and you can act on it. But when you are really high and really drugged, then that might not be the case. The truth is, we will never know why Jim Morrison died at the age of 27. Despite everything, the chaos, the heartbreak, Pamela was not just a footnote in Jim's story. She was his confidant, his muse, the woman he called his cosmic mate. He wrote poems for her. He followed her to Paris. She was one of the few who truly understood the depths of his inner world. And even if their love was toxic, it was also deeply real. Chapter 9, The Final Curtain, Forever United. Pamela Courson's life after Jim Morrison was marked by grief, addiction, and a crushing sense of responsibility. She struggled to manage his estate, cut herself off from friends and family, and drifted further into despair. On April 25th of 1974, less than 3 years after Jim's death, Pamela was found dead of a heroin overdose in her Hollywood apartment. She was 27, the same age Jim had been. A tragic symmetry, a final echo. In her final months, she began calling herself a widow. Friends recalled how she often spoke of Jim as if he was still alive, insisting that he would call any day. Legally, the California courts even recognized her as his common-law wife, but the battles over his estate outlived both of them. Despite the millions their fame had earned them, neither walked away with anything but a legend. An autopsy was performed on Pamela, noting that she was in perfect health and weighed around 115 pounds at the time of her death, which was more than what she had weighed the years before, and which clearly is an indicator. Maybe she was struggling, but then she also wasn't struggling as hard as she had before, or at least her eating disorder wasn't as bad anymore, because 115 pounds is a lot more healthy for her height than the 100 pounds that she was before. She also showed none of the usual signs of a regular drug abuser. The coroner stated that this wasn't the body of a heroin addict, suggesting that she wasn't a deep addict, contrary to how many Doors and Jim Morrison books portray her. They often portray her as a full-blown junkie, and from what the coroner said and the state that her body was in, that just wasn't true. Ray Manzarek played the organ at her funeral. Her death sealed her place in the infamous 27 Club, alongside Jim, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix. Their love story, volatile, passionate, and ultimately destructive, remains one of rock and roll's most mythologized romances. Together they created a world of brilliance and ruin, addiction and devotion, a love so intense it consumed them. Their last chapter is as much myth as it is reality. No autopsy, no closure, just a quiet Paris grave and a whispered legacy. The rumors never stopped. Jim didn't die, he faked it. He left for Africa. He died in a nightclub bathroom. Pamela knew more than she ever said. But whatever the truth might be, they became symbols of the 1960s unraveling, romantic rebels caught in the storm of their own making. Even now, on hot Los Angeles nights, you can almost imagine it. The ghost of a leather-clad singer crooning lines of unfulfilled love, Pamela's specter drifting through the incense haze of a vanished Laurel Canyon. They were kindred spirits, a Navy admiral's son and an Orange County wild child, bound by art, desire, and self-destruction. Their story is a cautionary tale about the cost of fame, the danger of unchecked passion, and the way addiction can hollow out even the deepest connection. And yet, within the wreckage, there was beauty. Jim's poetry, the Doors' music, Pamela's role as muse and mirror. Their love left a scar, but also a mark, raw, enduring, and unforgettable. Ray Manzarek summed it up best, quote, "Pamela and Jim are going to go down in the history books as great lovers, and people are going to be writing plays about them. It's Romeo and Juliet, it's Heloise and Abelard, it's Jim and Pam." So that is it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I cannot wait to hear what you think about all of this. As said, this is one of the most fascinating love stories of the 1960s for me, because it also stands so much for so much of the 1960s. For me, this stands for the counterculture and the hippie spirit, and how it all faded in the late 60s and early 70s, and how this very carefree time had so many victims and so many people died so tragically young. And as said, it's just one of the most fascinating stories to me, and I do truly believe that these two loved each other, and I also truly believe that Pamela didn't kill him or anything. I just think she couldn't bear being without him, and maybe she even wanted to overdose that night because she couldn't do it anymore. She always said that Jim would call any day now, so maybe that call she referred to was a call from the other side, and she was just like, that is it, I'm gonna go wherever he is, because I do believe that she felt like life was over and not worth living anymore without him. And I feel very, very heartbroken and sad for her. She was young, he was very young, and I think that's something that we always forget when we speak about him. Jim Morrison was only 27 when he died, which makes her only 24, which means that they had this very intense time together, but it wasn't a long time, and they were incredibly young, going through all of this, struggling with all of this, and figuring it out. But I do believe that if these two would have gotten older, they would have come around and just spent the rest of their lives together. I really wanted to bring you this story because, as said, this love story has a special place in my heart. But if there are any other love stories of 1960s or 70s muses, models, musicians, let me know. I would love to dive into those as well. I would also love to know what you think about all of this. I think Pamela Courson is often looked down upon as this woman who just hung around Jim Morrison. But I do believe that without her, the Doors wouldn't have ever reached the height that they did, because she inspired Jim to write all of these songs that made them so popular. But yeah, that is all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would love you to give it a thumbs up and maybe even share it with a friend. It supports me, it supports the channel, and it would truly mean the world. If you want to know more about the 1960s and 70s, the music, the people, the pop culture, makeup, fashion, maybe consider subscribing. I post about all of these things every single week, and I would love to have you around. I hope you have a beautiful day. Go out, enjoy the sunshine. Take yourself some time to focus on you and your mental health today, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye, dolls. I think I'm gonna go to the pool now because it is 1,000 degrees up here. People always ask, this isn't our, like, it is the attic of the house, but it's also our living room. This isn't a set or anything. We live there. There's our couch. We have a TV over there, and it's really hot up here during the summer. And this is a very heavy, warm dress, so I cannot wait to take this off and then hop into the cool water or do something like that. But yeah, I hope you have a beautiful day. See you.
Just